Hey, thanks for joining us today. My name is Kyle Davis. I'm the Next Steps pastor here at our Draper location. I'm so glad you decided to spend some time with us today at SMCC Online. We're in the middle of a series called Monster. It's all about God in the Old Testament who seems awful because he's doing seemingly terrible things. And so you're going to hear more about that from Pastor Eric later in the service. But speaking of terrible, one of the things we hear a lot as pastors is, I can't come to church, or I can't come to God because of the terrible things I've done. You don't know my story. I don't deserve God's love. And you're right, I don't know your story, but I do know what God says. And in Paul's letter to the Romans, in chapter 8, verse 38, he says this, "For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, neither things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord." So you're right, I don't know your story, but I do know what God says, and he says that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you've done. It only matters that because of what Jesus did on the cross, all he wants is for you to come closer to him, to take your next step towards full devotion and full delight. And so sing of that love with us with our worship band now.
Every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. You are holy. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your
Let's continue in our service, but before we do that, we want to be a church that cares for the people. So if you're experiencing hard times, things are rough, we would love to hear from you. We would love to talk to you as pastors to people. You can reach out to us at smcc@smccutah.org. And I'm so glad you got to tune in today and you're going to join us in this service for a hopeful and helpful message. But one of the things you can't experience is another one of our values here: belong before you believe. One of the things that makes church amazing for so many people is the other people. So if you're ready and when you're ready, we would love to have you. At any one of our locations, there are live services every single Sunday. So join us when you can. Let's join Pastor Eric now for the message.
Well, hey, if you and I haven't met, I'm Eric. I'm one of the teaching pastors here at SMCC. So glad to get to connect with you today. Maybe you attend one of our campuses, so welcome to you. A special welcome to the Lehigh location. So glad I get to connect with you this morning. Or maybe you've just been connecting online digitally through this unique season. Welcome to you as well. We love to leverage technology to bring helpful and hopeful messages to as many people as possible. Now, I have a question for you. Do you love action movies? I love action movies. Action movies like this one right here. It's a classic, The Bourne Identity. I love this one. How about this next one right here? Liam Neeson in Taken 1, 2, up to 12 perhaps. And this is my favorite action movie of all time. Going back just a little bit, I love this one right here, The Rock. One of the reasons that we love action movies so much is that we love to watch when justice is served. I mean, when good wins, when evil is vanquished, there's just something so satisfying about that. I mean, regardless of what you believe, when good triumphs over evil, we cheer. Now, let's leave the silver screen for just a moment and let's talk about real life. We all have some social justice issues that are our issues. There are social issues that concern us. And when it comes to these issues, we often think this: why doesn't someone stop this? This is wrong. This should be stopped right now. Something needs to be done. And so we jump on social media and we post about it, and, rightly so. But when it comes to these issues, there's often another question that begins to run through our minds after we address these issues. And this question, it can sit with us for quite some time. And you don't have to be a God person to have asked this question. And perhaps, though, because of this question, you're not a God person. And the question is this right here: why doesn't God stop this? Why doesn't God stop this? Have you ever had this question before? I certainly have asked myself this question. Human trafficking, why doesn't God stop this? Racism, why doesn't God stop this? Child abuse and starvation and natural disasters, why doesn't God stop this? Something needs to be done. Why hasn't God done something about this yet? I've had this thought many times throughout my life, and I would guess you have as well. Now, when it comes to this thought and when it comes to these issues, here's what you need to know. You've made a judgment. You've made a judgment about these issues. You've said, this is evil, this is wrong, this should be stopped. When you've done that, you've become a judgmental person. Now, I'm not judging you for that. We all need to make judgments about how things should be, how we see the world. When we think this way about these issues, something should be done. We've officially made a judgment. Now, here's what's so fascinating. Throughout the Bible, God has judged. God has got involved into situations, and God has stopped some things. God has stopped some things that you and I would say should be stopped. Just like you and I come to judgments about certain things, God too, throughout the Old Testament, has come to judgments about many, many things. But do you know what people say then about those judgments? It's not, why doesn't God stop this? Here's the next thing that people often say, especially about what we see in the Old Testament, the narratives in the Old Testament. It's this right here. Well, how could God stop them like that? How could God stop them like that? I mean, God, why did you do it that way? God, I don't know if I like the fact that you did it like that. Richard Dawkins, who wrote a very famous book called The God Delusion, has summed up something that's very, very interesting. He sums up this tension like this. He says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser. Richard Dawkins has gone public with what I think many people think in private. But here's what I find very interesting about this conclusion and other conclusions about what God has done in the Old Testament. We often think, you know what, if there was a God who was good, if he was real, he would do something by now, he would stop this by now. And because he hasn't, I don't think I believe in God. And yet, on the other hand, people often think this, you know what, when God stopped it throughout the Old Testament, I don't like the way he stopped it, so you know what, I don't believe in God. And I bet you can see the flaw in that line of thinking. That is called a double standard. And because of our inability to understand this ancient document, really multiple documents inside of the Old Testament, we put God in a lose-lose situation. See, Richard Dawkins might be a good biologist. I think he's an even better entertainer, but I don't think he's a very good philosopher, and he is no theologian. And so today, I want to address the charge, the accusation that God is a bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. Welcome back to our series, Monster, where we are looking at the accusation that God is one. In this series, we want to shine a light on the dark shadows of the Old Testament to make sense of this ancient document. And here's the good news. Once you have a few tools to interpret and understand the things that are going on in the Old Testament starts to make perfect sense. So last week, we looked at the charge that God is narcissistic, insecure, jealous, desperate that people worship him. And we saw last week that God is far from that. And so this week, my hope is to show you why God did what he did in the Old Testament and why he did it the way that he did it. And if I do my job well, we will look at those narratives and say this, God, thank you. Man, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for stopping what you stopped. Thank you for your justice. Thank you for your mercy and your love. God, thank you for what you have done in the Old Testament. And then at the end of today's message, I'll show you how these ancient narratives really do connect to our lives here and now. So, as we dive into the Old Testament, let's begin with one of those tough passages. Let's take a look at this right here. Deuteronomy, it's a part of the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Pentateuch. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, this is a point in time where Israel was about to enter into the land of Canaan, often called the conquest of Canaan. He says this, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. Completely destroy them. Which sounds a lot like genocide. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Now, to make sense of this passage, there's a very important phrase inside of this passage that I need you to know about. And it is this phrase right here. It's this phrase, to devote to destruction. It's one Hebrew word. It's the word harem. And it is used 37 times throughout the Old Testament in reference to the Canaanites, 10 times in reference to the Amalekites. It's the word harem. It means to devote to destruction or completely destroy, as we just read. Something devoted to something else. Devoted to destruction. Now, here's what's very fascinating. Here's what you need to know. This word was not just used in the Bible. It was used in a lot of ancient Near East literature. Let me show you a few examples of this. For I had devoted them to destruction, harem, for the god Ashtur Chemosh. This is what King Mesha of Moab once said. I devoted them to destruction. It's the word harem. So when it came to recording victory and defeat in battle in the ancient Near East, the authors of these texts would pick up this ancient literary device, a tool, an ancient literary motif to explain and describe everything that was going on. And it was the word harem. Let me give you another example of where this is used. The numerous army of Mitanni was overthrown within the hour, annihilated totally, or harem, completely devoted to destruction, like those not existent. So what I want you to see is this idea, harem, is not just reserved for the Bible. This is something that pops up in a lot of ancient Near Eastern warfare literature. It fits into a style. It fits into a motif. It was a literary tool that authors used to describe these moments throughout history. Now, here's what's so incredibly fascinating. In all of these examples, both in the Bible and outside of the Bible, the people who were completely destroyed, well, they still lived after they were destroyed. There's records of these people after there's this recording that they were destroyed, which is so interesting. And that begins to become a clue. It's a clue contextually for what the word harem meant and how these authors used the word harem in their literature. And here's how they used it. They used it as hyperbole. It was used hyperbolically. And if you don't know what hyperbole means, it doesn't mean fantasy. It doesn't mean myth. It doesn't mean fiction. It is linguistic exaggeration of something that actually did happen. Now, sports fans out there, sports fans listening, sports fans in the room, you do this all the time. When we say something like the Utes completely destroyed BYU like they always do, we're using hyperbole. When we say the Raiders lost like they always do, they were crushed again, we're using hyperbole. We destroyed, we slaughtered, we cleaned up, we crushed them, we killed them. We know that the other team wasn't exterminated. We know what's being described. It was a satisfactory victory. This is what hyperbole is all about. Now you might be thinking, Eric, that's pretty clever. Come on, one quick example, a few examples outside the Bible, hyperbole, that's nice, that's clever. Do you have any more examples of this? Absolutely. Let's read another passage in the Old Testament that talks about all of this. Joshua was the one who kind of led this conquest into Canaan. Let's look at this. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the mountain slopes. Like when we say from sea to sea, kind of everything in between. This is the Old Testament's way of describing it. The western foothills, the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed. Harem. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. The passage goes on. Joshua subdued them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and from the whole region of Goshen to Gibeon. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. It's very important. We'll come back to that in a second. I want you to know this about biblical battles. Battles in the Bible, they happened usually at military outposts with professional soldiers, willing combatants. They did not happen in places where civilians led. If there were any civilians, they often had fled by this point. And these battles were small in nature. In fact, the loss of life in battles in our country's history far exceeds any loss of life in these Old Testament battles. It's so fascinating, and it's very, very important that we understand that. Military outposts, professional soldiers, willing combatants, really a small loss of life, civilians that had already fled. It's important to understand that when we consider these battles. So here we see Joshua completely clean up. He's slaughtered. He completely destroyed. And just a few chapters later, look at what we see in the very same book of Joshua. They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. It's like the Canaanites are still around. They're still present. They're still in this land. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. So in these examples that we see in the Old Testament and outside of the Old Testament, harem was put into effect. And someone was completely destroyed, but that does not mean extermination, because we just see later that they're still present. They're still around historically, which lets us know that the word harem is being used hyperbolically. To completely destroy was used hyperbolically. Now, we look at these passages and we look at these texts and we want to look with Western mathematical precision. It's like, well, was everybody destroyed or not? And we look at it through our Western mindset, looking for the precision of mathematics. But what we should do is look at it with literary precision. We should read it in the way the author meant it. And the way the author meant it was hyperbolically. And that lets us know something about the battle. And it lets us know something, that the victory was accomplished, that the victory was, in fact, sufficient. Now, here's what you need to know about harem warfare. Harem warfare was very unique. It came with a whole new set of rules. Harem warfare, it followed a certain formula. It was one of the most humanitarian ways to do battle that the world had ever seen at this time. Harem warfare helped people understand something. When it says they were completely destroyed, or when the word harem is used, it's a tool to quickly communicate something. The rules of war were not violated, and a victory was secured. This is a shorthand way. Harem is a shorthand way of saying the rules of war were not violated, and the victory was secure. And when this formula is followed, it tells us something very important about how the battle went down. And throughout the Old Testament, we see the formula look like this. God initiated the charge, Israel acted on the charge, and God secured the victory. That's the formula that we see in the conquest of Canaan. But at times, God did not set the charge, and Israel still acted, and Israel then often lost. And so when this formula is followed, it tells us something about the battle. This is not some mighty power Israel taking over these weak nations for fun, right? It was not like that at all. See, Israel is usually outnumbered. They are understaffed. They are outgunned. They are up against fortified cities with professional soldiers who have cavalry. And Israel is basically this small militia. And so this tells us something very, very significant about the battle. Because what are the chances that Israel, this ragtag group of people entering into battle, could win? Very, very slim. So what does it mean when they do win? As we read earlier, it was God who fought the battle. This is his victory. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever received a gift from somebody and you knew that they were not capable of giving you the gift, so you knew there was someone else behind the gift giving? Every Christmas or even on my birthday or Father's Day, I get a gift, and on the package it says from Nora and Jack, and I open it up, and it's very clear that Nora and Jack, my 8 and 5-year-old, cannot afford the gift and would have no idea that I needed the gift. So I look at my kids and I say, guys, thank you. Wow, thanks for giving Dad this gift. And then I look over at my wife, Carissa, and I know that she's the one who gave the gift through them. She was the one behind this moment in time. And this is what we see in the Old Testament with the formula of harem. Israel they're in the moment, but it is God acting behind what Israel is doing. He is the one victorious in these moments. So you might be listening and saying, okay, Eric, I get it. Hyperbole, yeah, that makes sense. It wasn't extermination, but come on, Eric. These are still people killing other people, and it seems like God is commanding it. He is commanding it. So, Eric, this must be genocide. This must be racial. This must be ethnic in nature. Let me tell you something. There are plenty of times that God judged the immoral behavior of the Canaanites, just like we like to judge immoral behavior and say that should stop. But you need to know this. There are plenty of times that God judged Israel for their immoral behavior as well. In fact, the word harem is used more towards Israel than it is towards other nations. Let me read you an example of this. Jeremiah. Later on, we see the same idea presented to the Israelites. But you did not listen to me, declares the Lord. Like, you stopped listening to me. Yeah, you might be a part of Israel, but you're acting like you're a part of Canaan. You've aroused my anger with what your hands have made, and you have brought harm to yourselves. Therefore, the Lord Almighty says this, because you have not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and an everlasting ruin. Completely destroy. this land. See, this harem language is used towards the Canaanites, but it's also used towards the Israelites. And this tells us something very, very important. This thing is not an ethnic thing. This thing is not a racial thing. There are plenty of people who are non-Israelites who are welcomed into the Israelite family. Rahab is an example of this. Rahab was a bartender, a female bartender in the city of Jericho, most likely, who when the Israelites move into battle, Rahab joins the Israelites, kind of is adopted in and welcomed into the family. This is not racial in nature. This is not ethnic in nature. This goes much deeper than that. This goes beyond a certain tribe. So I just don't think it's genocide at all. And on top of all of this, here's the thing that's so fascinating. Inside of this harem language, we might think, man, God seems harsh. Well, inside of Deuteronomy, where a lot of the harem language is used, we see God described as a God of love. So the author of Deuteronomy, the person recording all of these things that happened, Moses, when he's there connecting the dots, he's not schizophrenic about who God is. God can be both loving and just. Let me read you one of those loving passages in Deuteronomy. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than the other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples, but it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors, that he brought you out with a mighty hand, referring to history with Israel. It goes on, and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. So, what's really going on here? It's not extermination and it's not genocide. God is just and God is loving. So how do we make sense of all of this? Here's how we make sense of it. God is stopping in the Old Testament that which harms people. This is about sin. This is not about God destroying a person. This is what is going on. God is trying to help people. He's trying to free people from all the things that would harm him. He is bringing justice into the world, justice into these nations to stop the things that we would agree should be stopped. So here's a very easy way to remember everything that's going on. In fact, it's so easy to memorize, it might be a little cheesy. But here's how you can remember this. Here's what's going on in the Old Testament. It is not genocide. It's not killing based on race. It's not killing based on ethnicity. It's not genocide, but, and here's the word that I made up, it's idolcide. It's idolcide. It is the killing of false religion. It is the destruction of false gods. It is the stopping of false worship, the type of worship that harms people, the type of worship that destroys people, the type of worship that leads to immoral behavior that harms people. It is not genocide, it is idolcide. God is stopping the worship of false gods because over time that erodes culture, and over time it destroys community. Over time it is destructive in people's lives, and God is stepping in and saying that should be stopped. Just like we often think, God, would you step in and stop it? In the Old Testament, he did it. It is not genocide, it is idolcide. And as we dig in deeper to the book of Deuteronomy, we see that worship was at the heart of the harem. Let me show it to you. Destroy completely, harem, destroy completely all the places on the high mountains. This is very interesting. They are to destroy places of worship. This was unique to Israel. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods, false gods, their idols. It's not genocide, it's idolcide. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods and wipe out their names from those places. Wow. It's not genocide, but it is idolcide. Now, let me tell you something about Canaanites and the way that they worshiped. Canaanites sacrificed humans because their gods were thirsty for human blood. Do you see why God would want to stop this type of worship? Why God would want to destroy these idols? See, in the land of Canaan, their gods were incestuous, and therefore it was okay for that to happen inside of their culture. They took their cues from their gods. Temple sex was permitted. Child sacrifice was permitted. Bestiality, it was permitted. Because it was their understanding that once their god Baal was awakened and pleased and had been satisfied, that then Baal would provide water and rain to the land. And as the god of fertility, it would make the land more fertile. This is what was going on in the land of Canaan. And God looks at the Israelites and says, do not adopt that worldview. Do not live that way. That type of worship and that type of behavior, it should be stopped. This is far more about a spiritual threat to people than it was about a military threat to people. And so God uses the Israelites as an instrument of his justice, an instrument of his judgment about wicked religion, immoral and destructive behavior, immoral and destructive sexual practices that over time cost people their lives, that over time led to more destruction and more death. And God says, now is the time for it to be stopped. And Israel was an instrument of justice. So, here's how we should look at it. The battle is not Israel against Canaan. No, it's far bigger than that. The battle really is God against evil. So God is not xenophobic. He is not a bully. He is not bloodthirsty. He is stopping the behavior that we would also agree should be stopped because he loves people too much for them to be harmed in this way by the false gods of the Canaanites. Wow, what goodness, what justice, what mercy from the God of the Old Testament, really the only true God. So if we were to sum this up, let's just sum up kind of everything I've discussed in a few bullet points. Here's what we would see. To summarize, the destruction language is exaggerated in the stereotypical form of ancient battle motif. Very important that we understand that. The destruction language was carried out in military settings and directed towards willing combatants. Very important, we understand that. Destruction language allowed and hoped for exceptions like Rahab rather than being absolute. So there was mercy, there was grace, there were exceptions inside of the harem language. The destruction language was first and foremost leveraged against Canaanite religion. It was far more about Canaanite religion than Canaanite persons. A couple more. It allowed for, the destruction language allowed for peace treaties, and it really minimized civilian casualties. In the destructive language, it was not based on the race of people, but the evil in people, the evil in both Canaanites and Israelites. It was not based on race, it was based on sin. It wasn't based on the race of a person, it was based on sin inside of nations. So, what do we do with all this? I mean, come on, we've talked about what was going on in the Old Testament, but what do we do with this today? Well, we can do something very, very specific. We still should take seriously the harm that evil and sin can do in our lives. So as we fast forward from the Old Testament to the New Testament, we see the Apostle Paul say something very stern, very punchy, very helpful, and very challenging. Look at what he says to his friends, Jesus followers, in the city of Colossae. He says this, put to death. Wow. Put to death. What, Paul? Put to death whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Sexual immorality. Just like it happened in Canaan, it happens now. Put to death sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. It's not genocide, it's idolcide. And according to the Apostle Paul, we still should put to death idols. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. The wrath, the justice, the judgment of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Paul wraps up this section. Here there is no Gentile or Jew. For God, it has never been about just one nation. It was one nation that existed for all nations. And so now in Christ, it's neither Gentile nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but it's all about Christ. Christ is all and is in all. So the Apostle Paul is saying this, and I think we can learn this from the extent of the narratives in the Old Testament. We should still take seriously the idols in our lives that harm us and the sin in our lives that seeks to destroy us. Famous pastor, theologian John Owen said this: we should be killing sin, otherwise sin will be killing us. We should take seriously the reminder from the Old Testament and the command of the New Testament to put to death those things inside of us that hurt us and harm us. The sin in the world that God stopped in the Old Testament is still sin in our lives that can be stopped with God's grace and mercy in our lives. So how do we do that? Let me give it to you in a very, very simple way. Every sin in our life is connected to a lie that we believe about our life. And so if you have something in your life, something that was just listed here in this list from the Apostle Paul, figure out what lie you believe that's leading you to engage in that behavior. Because once you can pinpoint the lie you believe about that thing, you can replace the lie with God's truth about that thing, and then you can be free. You can put to death that sin in your life, as the Apostle Paul talks about. We should take seriously the evil in us and the idols that surround us, because that tries to harm us. It will harm us. Now, for many years, I was a youth pastor, and I remember one day I was in the McDonald's drive-thru. It's where every youth pastor spends a lot of time. I'm in the McDonald's drive-thru, and I'm sitting there with one of my students, and the student says this to me: Eric, I don't think I'm a real Christian. And I said, man, tell me more. And he said, the reason I don't think I'm a real Christian is that a real Christian would not be struggling with or fighting with this sin in his life. And I thought about it, and I understood where he was coming from, and maybe you've thought this way. If I was a real Christian, I wouldn't be doing this anymore. But I said this to him. I said, you know what? I think you really have trusted Christ, because now you're fighting the thing that dishonors you and dishonors Christ. You're in the fight. You are engaged in the battle, and that tells me you want to honor Christ. No, I think you're a real Christian because you want to fight that thing. It's not that you're not a real Christian because that thing is just present in your life. And so I hope to help that young student engage in this battle against sin in his life. And when we engage in the battle, it lets us know we're serious about following after and obeying Christ. So, how do we destroy and put to death sin in our life? Well, the best way to do it is to do it with other people. It's to find a group of people you can be honest with that can be there for you in the battle. And across all of our locations this fall, groups are ramping up. Celebrate Recovery is ramping up. Men's groups and women's groups, they're ramping up. And you should get into one of those groups, because then you don't have to do battle with the things in your life alone. So here's the bottom line of today's message. It's very simple. Here it is. Destroy that which seeks to destroy you. Destroy that which seeks to destroy you and your trust in God. So why doesn't God stop it? Why doesn't God stop more of the evil that you see in the world and that I see in the world? Because if God began to stop every bit of evil right now, eventually he would arrive at you. And before that, he probably would have arrived at me. And so God is patient with us, allowing us to change from the inside out, because he is gracious. And so God is patient with us. And that is so important. So the Old Testament tells us this: God has stopped evil. The New Testament tells us this: God is stopping evil through his Spirit in our lives now. And the book of Revelation tells us that someday God will stop evil completely. But until that day comes, let's take our next step to destroy and put to death the evil in us. Let's take our next step to partner with Jesus as he changes us from the inside out. God has stopped evil. God is stopping evil, and one day God will stop it entirely, because he is a good and just God. Would you pray with me this morning? God, we thank you for this conversation. It's very academic in some ways as we seek to understand these ancient documents and how they talked with this literary motif surrounding battle. And as we understand that motif, we see something. This was not extermination and this was not genocide. This was about something far bigger than that. This is about stopping the evil in the world that would harm people, evil connected specifically to false gods. And so today we want to trust you, the only true God. God, you are not a moral monster. God, you are doing the moral thing that we long for because we long for justice and we long for love. And we know from the Bible that you are both of those things. So God, to everybody watching today and listening, struggling with something in their own lives, a battle going on in our own lives, I pray that we would take our next step to trust you, to see how you change us from the inside out. When we understand what it is that you've done for us, it gives us the motivation to want to obey and follow you. Help us do the hard work of pinpointing the lie that we believe that's leading to the sin perhaps in our lives so that we can replace it with truth and be free from it. Jesus, we thank you for this time. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
John Owen said, "You must be killing sin or sin will be killing you." God is still at war for the idols inside of our hearts, just like Pastor Eric said. And the best way for you to join that fight is with battle buddies. These are buddies who will go into battle for you, with you. These are people who encourage you, help you. And when you're too tired to fight, they will fight for you. At SMCC, our battle buddies are in our groups. At every one of our locations, virtually and in person, we have small groups, support groups, classes that would love to join in that fight with you. So if you feel like that's your next step, like Pastor Eric said, please reach out to your campus pastor, reach out to your Next Steps pastor, or email us smcc@smccutah.org. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you guys next week.